Hello, and welcome to History of the Present. This is Brian Daitzman, editor-in-chief of the Intellectualist and host of History of the Present, a new series co-produced with Lincoln Square. Today, we are glad to have Adam Klasfeld here with us today. Adam's the editor-in-chief of All Rise News. Adam's a long-time courtroom and legal reporter, and he's probably one of the clearest guides to help guide us to what's happening right now in the world of law, politics, particularly as it relates to justice. Adam has been spent years covering courts, filings, prosecutions, trials related to civil liberties, executive power, and really the pressure points where law meets democratic survival. Today, we're going to be focusing on the Trump Justice Department, which has announced a nearly $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund tied to Trump's so-called settlement against the IRS. This is a fund that DOJ says will compensate people who are victims, quote unquote, of weaponization in lawfare. Critics say this is a taxpayer bailout for people who are essentially being rewarded for committing crime. Adam is here to talk about this today. Adam, welcome to History of the Present. I really want to start with something basic. Does this fund have any historical background? For instance, has there ever been anything like this in U.S. history where people have committed crimes, very serious crimes, where the federal government then says, you've been convicted by a jury of your peers. It's been, let's just say you've gone through appeals. And now, though, because you're a political ally of the president in power who has pardoned you, we're now going to pay you for breaking the law. Is there any precedent for this in U.S. history?
The question almost answers itself. Absolutely not. There is no precedent, and it's absolutely egregious. The so-called precedent offered by Todd Blanche and the Trump Justice Department is the Keeps Eagles settlement. And that was over discrimination against Native Americans. And that was supervised by a court to redress their actual injuries, not to redress the fact that the people who were armed rioters who assaulted law enforcement in order to illegally keep Donald Trump in power, getting taxpayer-funded bounties for their troubles. And the more that you look at the actual legal documents over this, the worse that it gets. And here's how it operates. You have Todd Blanche appointing a 5-person panel, a star chamber, if you will, where all 5 of the members are chosen by him, one in consultation with congressional leaders.
And just be clear, star chamber has a very particular term in a legal history. Can you just explain what that is, Adam, very quickly?
Absolutely. That dates back to the British monarchy. It was courts in the 15th through 17th century where there was no transparency over it. You would find out what happened because of the outcome. Maybe someone was hanged, maybe their property was seized. And that's essentially what this fund is. You have a 5-person panel that doesn't need to disclose their reasons for giving someone money. They don't need to disclose who they are giving money to. They don't need to disclose how much money they are giving that person. Trump and his family are fond of saying they're not getting any money from that. That is a lie. As a matter of fact, there's a giant exception to this fund. One of those exceptions is entities can be claimants. It says so right on the legal documentation. And ABC News reported before this became public, yes, Trump's entities can apply as well. So that's one giant asterisk. The other is this is a $1.776 billion settlement, and we can get back to that later. In a normal settlement, that would be subject to taxes. It isn't here, and it says that right on the document, or at least they're purporting that that isn't taxable here. Plus, there's the second day document that Todd Blanche added that adds up to a huge tax benefit to Trump and his family over essentially making clear that they won't be audited for taxes that could add up to the tens of millions of dollars or more.
So it sounds like to me, Adam, it sounds like we have a president who's placed himself above the law. which is something that is really, I think, probably would be, the founders would say, would be counter to our constitutional character. I mean, Adam, I've been reading your reporting for a number of years. I recall there was a man who, when he attacked the Capitol, he tried to gouge out a police officer's eyes. And I apologize to the audience because I know this is very ugly stuff, but it's very possible that man can get money from taxpayers. Is that correct?
That is correct. And as a matter of fact, that man is Officer Daniel Hodges, who is one of the plaintiffs on a lawsuit trying to stop this thing. He was the same man who was crushed in between the doors.
I'm talking about the assailants. So I recall there was a man who attacked a police officer.
Correct. What I'm saying is that police officer, his assailants, could be it's the same officer whose eyes were almost gouged out, was the one who was crushed between the doors. And his assailants are just as able to file one of these claims as anyone else. And due to the lack of transparency, we simply don't know who is awarded claims, why they are awarded claims. There's a provision of this document that says that the panel, that is, let's be blunt, they are entirely controlled by Todd Blanche and by extension by Trump, who can oust any of them for any reason or no reason whatsoever. So this panel makes secret decisions about which assailants could get money or why. But why even stop at the individual assailants? Since entities can collect money, we can see something where Proud Boys International LLC receives millions or tens of millions of dollars or more to stand by for the next time. There's nothing in this agreement. If anyone, it's a very clear as day 9-page agreement that reveals just how hideous this thing is.
Adam, thank you so much for that really detailed explanation here. In your reporting, is Todd Blanche respected by the rank and file of the DOJ? And when I say rank and file, I mean the attorneys, FBI agents, people who actually do the work that keeps us safe.
So I think the answer to that question is in the results. The Trump DOJ leaks like a sieve. He is respected as much as the FBI rank and file respect Kash Patel, which is to say not at all. You see Kash Patel being humiliated in several different news stories, all of which cite more than 12 different sources. The respect shows in the defections of a new hollowed out Justice Department, where people are leaving because they won't go along with certain schemes to punish Trump's political enemies. We are seeing a Trump DOJ where Trump's face, and I call it the Trump DOJ to really set it apart from what the DOJ is and has been. During Trump's first term, I and no other reporter that I had known about actually used that phrase. The DOJ is the DOJ. And I cut my teeth covering the Southern District of New York beat. And during Trump's first term, there was a lot of pushback in the Southern District of New York. The U.S. attorneys of the Southern District of New York, in some cases, resigned or were ousted because they refused to bend the knee to Donald Trump. Well, Trump doesn't have that problem this time. His face hangs outside a banner of Main Justice. You have on a Justice Department press release, the Justice Department calling it the Trump Justice Department. And you see a lot of opposition to that from inside the Justice Department. Maybe it's quiet in the form of resignations, and sometimes it is louder and they're gone. But we saw it after the abduction of Kilmar Abrego Garcia when he was spirited away from the country to El Salvador, and the Supreme Court ordered the facilitation of his return to the United States. You had a Justice Department attorney accidentally say the truth in court, and then he was ousted from the Justice Department and became a whistleblower. So in terms of the general air of the respect that this Justice Department has, I think the proof is in the pudding. You have a Justice Department that is struggling to staff up, where they simply don't have the manpower to cover all the cases that they want to.
And that's what I want to get to, Adam. When I was doing the research preparing for this interview, I was curious. Right now, we're in a military conflict. The president's he's unwilling to call it a war, but we are at war with Iran. We are killing people in Iran with heavy weaponry. So we're at war with Iran. Iran has traditionally used terrorist proxies to hurt and kill Americans. They actually have a long history of doing so successfully. Based on your understanding of the DOJ, and I've seen reporting concerning how different assets in the DOJ have been taken away from terrorism. Do you think we're safer against terrorism in this second term of the Trump administration than we were, let's say, under President Biden 16, 17 months ago?
We are less safe, and we have seen reporting. One of the things when Kash Patel lashed out against the Atlantic magazine over their reporting of his drinking, and their sources saying that he's drinking to excess, he is sometimes nowhere to be found when he's needed. Well, that has a national security dimension. But one of the things that they reported in that was that one of the divisions that he had hollowed out involved people who specialized in Iran's asymmetrical warfare measures. So that counterterrorism has suffered because of that. And why? Because there was a connection to the investigations of Trump. And so it shows how the retribution scheme gets in the way of public security, of national security. And we are seeing that examples of that every day. And going back to the staffing crisis inside the DOJ, because that's what it is, you're seeing remarkable things where Justice Department officials are posting job postings on social media, on X, and they're saying
explain why, because it's so hard. If you're an attorney who went to law school, to explain how hard it is to get into the DOJ.
It was one of the most desired jobs that you could get. You didn't have to dangle bonuses to people in order to get that job. It was a coveted job. People dreamed of getting that job, and it was very, every former federal prosecutor who I've spoken to about this, you can see the pain in their eyes as they talk about this, that you had to be top of your class from one of the top schools, and that not only are they struggling to keep the numbers up, they are openly saying they are looking for people who support Trump's agenda.
Which is going to be hard to find, because if you're a lawyer, you have to take an oath to the Constitution, right?
Correct. And as a matter of fact, lawyers are idealistic people. Despite all the jokes and despite the widely misunderstood quote, "First thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers." I mean, Shakespeare did not say that for the reasons that is often quoted, and we'll get back to that. The cream of the crop are actually idealistic about their line of work. And that's been my experience in interviewing.
Most people, when they think of lawyers, they see maybe a very particular movie version, but most lawyers actually do care about the law and justice, or you can't do the job.
Right. And they also care about their law license, and they're being asked to do things that can very much imperil that. And that is why Todd Blanche, as one of his top priorities, is pushing back at, and let's be blunt, trying to intimidate bar associations, state bars that would dare to impose professional standards. We are in a very, very dark place.
I've been, just reviewing some of the latest legal news, and it appears to me that the head of the DOJ Civil Rights Division, I believe her name is, the lawyer's name is Harmeet Dillon, I believe that's correct. I was just reading that she is trying to coerce U.S. states to get voter data. Why is she doing that?
Well, because Harmeet Dillon was one of Trump's lawyers during the 2020 election who pushed the big lie. She claimed that there was an enormous fraud, and she is all in on the Trump Justice Department's effort to rewrite the history of the 2020 election. Now, they are putting this under an election integrity banner. They do not...
Very Orwellian.
It's very Orwellian. But one thing that is probably one of the saving graces of our rule of law, not to be too glib here, has been the abject incompetence of this effort. Today, she lost not one of those lawsuits, but two of those lawsuits. She is now 0 for 8 in a nationwide effort to hoover up as much voter roll information as she can. Some of that includes a lot of sensitive information. In Michigan, for example, voter registration information includes voting history. And so and one of the federal judges who rejected these suits said just that. And this is a dragnet. You have Harmeet Dillon has filed these lawsuits in 29 states and the District of Columbia. And she is 0 for 8 so far. We'll see if she gets to 0 to 30. You know, I mean, so far it's a blowout because she's...
Well, why does Trump have such bad lawyers?
You know, I think he demands two contradictory things that cannot be squared. He demands that lawyers act out his agenda to prove, really Orwellian lies. You know, do a lawsuit that proves the 2020 election was stolen. Well, the 2020 election wasn't stolen, and so when you demand or prosecute my political enemy and say that they did this, and when that case collapses, Trump is chagrined, and Pam Bondi is no longer at the head of the Justice Department. And why is that? Because there wasn't a serious case. There was no one in the Eastern District of Virginia who actually was an experienced prosecutor who would go anywhere near the prosecutions of James Comey in the first instance and Letitia James. So he had to put...
Why would they not have wanted to do... Why would a serious lawyer not want to indict James Comey or Letitia James?
Because they value their law license. I mean, look, we have the fact that there are groups going out already filing bar complaints that are being adjudicated. We will see what ultimately happens with Lindsay Halligan, whether she got out early enough.
Was she the insurance defense lawyer? Was she an insurance defense lawyer who was acting as the DC assistant U.S. attorney?
In the Eastern District of Virginia, yes, she was. And by insurance lawyer, she represented insurance companies trying to wriggle out of claims, and so that was her.
That's not a typical trajectory for someone who's going to be a federal prosecutor, is it?
Oh, no, and for trajectory to someone who wants to be the U.S. attorney, the first time she walked into a grand jury room was to indict James Comey. That was her first case. Yeah, that is Twilight Zone material. And it showed. We found out over the course of the now dismissed first prosecution of James Comey that the full grand jury never actually saw the first indictment. There was, they had reached a true bill the first time. We don't know the exact way that they got there because that isn't particularly public. Yeah. When it actually went to the judge, there was this mix-up between the charging documents, and the one that became the final indictment was not seen by the entire grand jury, which was something that was really remarked upon when that went down in court. I mean, I was there in Alexandria, Virginia, when that fact came to be revealed in court, and the press corps that was there, we were stunned. We had never heard of anything like that.
Pam Bondi, about 6 weeks, maybe a little more, when she was still the attorney general, when she was testifying, she showed a lot of contempt for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. And there's also been a lot of criticism of Kash Patel. I recall victims Jeffrey Epstein. They said, why is the director of the FBI partying like a college student now? And I think this was about the controversy where I think it had to do with a hockey game, and he was pounding beers in front of a television, and people say, well, maybe if this was a college student, maybe if this was something like he was at a sports game and he wasn't the FBI director, maybe we could look at it differently. But he's the FBI director, and we're at war. How are the Epstein survivors doing now? This has been a very tough time for them. Can you speak to that at all, Adam?
Right. I mean, they have been trying to call as much attention as possible. I will say this one thing: when we talk about the release of the Epstein files, it was the fact that they came forward, and how has the rule of law, to the extent that it remains in the United States, held on? It was because by the work of civil society. And here, in the context of the Epstein story, the Epstein survivors demonstrating outside of Congress last year, they're still holding, events in Florida recently. They're very short walk from where I live. There is an exhibition in Lower Manhattan that shows that is the Epstein Files Library, that has an exhibition and a printout of the 3.5 million files to date. So I think that they have shown an incredible degree of stick-to-itiveness, that they have pushed this story, and they're not letting people forget it, much to Trump's chagrin. And the fact that the files were released, Trump is now trying to claim that he was for it. He didn't, but I mean, remember when they had to take Lauren Boebert into the Situation Room? He was fighting this tooth and nail, and it was the organizing. There was a time when no one believed. Forget about there are millions of files that are yet to be released, but there was a time that no one believed that one of them would be released. And Trump folded when it became clear that he would lose.
Why do you think, Adam, the president has said, I've done nothing criminal? The Attorney General, Todd Blanche, he said, listen, he made a true statement. He goes, it's not a crime in itself to party with Jeffrey Epstein, which is a very low bar for leadership, by the way. Mm-hmm. But he did say that. Why do you think the president is so against anything related to Jeffrey Epstein going out? I mean, for many people, they take this as consciousness of guilt, which is there is no conviction, right? And I don't believe the president has ever been formally charged with anything related to Epstein. I know he has been civilly adjudicated a sexual abuser, but he has not been formally charged with anything related to Jeffrey Epstein. Why do you think he's so against this information getting out, Adam?
Well, even avoiding any kind of speculation, just speaking the facts here, so much has emerged already that has been humiliating to him and his friends. I'll just give one example. There was the birthday book when that came out, and that came out as a result of the House Oversight Committee's subpoena to Epstein's estate. And now, let's talk about Trump's denials here. Trump's denial is that somewhere around page 265 of this 300 some odd page book, there is one page that's a forgery, and it's the one with his signature and the imagined conversation between him and Epstein, and a drawing of a female figure that is a very immature drawing at best. So that is humiliation number one. That's one of the files that came out during this. Another file that came out was his one detailing his call with the Palm Beach police chief during the investigation. And
Yeah.
he's saying in this conversation that you should look into Ghislaine Maxwell. She is evil, and that is entirely inconsistent with his other position of "I wish her well."
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's what I'm curious about. How can he say, "Oh, she's evil," but then there's all these reports that she's getting special treatment in prison? Can you square those two, Adam?
I cannot. I don't know anyone else who can. And it's interesting because when that file was released, you had the White House claiming real vindication of, look, he was going after Jeffrey Epstein. Well, that would make sense as vindication if there were no other public record surrounding Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, but there is a vast public record. There is a record, someone who believes that Ghislaine Maxwell is evil, and everyone knew what Jeffrey Epstein was up to try to square that with his other much friendlier statements to her years later is an impossible task.
And Adam, to your point, though, it's like you said, if this was the only thing, but there's a lot of other things, for instance. And I recall there was, I believe it was a 2002 New York Magazine article where the president appears to say, if I recall, again, I'm paraphrasing, where he's like, "Yeah, I know Jeffrey Epstein. He's a great guy. He likes women on the younger side."
Correct.
He says that. And he sort of, and then you obviously 2008, we learn about, he was, I believe, it was 2008, 2009, I believe he became formerly a registered sex offender, right? And so the question is, if the president is innocent and he's declaring he's innocent, I mean, the president has been convicted of 34 felonies and he is an adjudicated sexual abuser. The fact that he's saying he's so innocent, but he's also doing these other things, what are Americans supposed to make of that?
Right. Well, I think he has lost so much support, even from his own political supporters in this case. They see him trying to duck and weave all of the questions surrounding the Epstein files. They don't believe that he supported it from the beginning. They understand that he fought the release of these files until it became politically untenable. And I think that it's just quite clear that he does not like this story. He doesn't want more scrutiny about it. Everything that emerges is full of contradictions, and he's trying to control the story, but he's not in control of it.
I mean, where do we go from here? I'm looking at this. It's been a really tough go for the United States for a while now. I recall the president, he came down escalator in 2015 at Trump Tower. Before that, we've had a tough go. We experienced 9/11. We experienced the war in Iraq. We experienced a number of very scary hurricanes. This is a very scary time for Americans. Adam, what keeps you optimistic?
Well, what keeps me optimistic is the people who are fighting to sustain the rule of law. And let's look at some of the things that have happened over the past year and a half. We went from militaries being onto the streets of American cities to that being successfully challenged all the way up to the Supreme Court. We went from a cover-up of the Epstein files to survivors organizing and reaching a near unanimous decision in both branches of the Congress. We went from a powerless, undocumented immigrant being spirited out of the country with no legal process to being on a endless winning streak all the way up to the Supreme Court, getting out of a foreign prison and defeating the full force of the federal government in criminal and immigration cases. What we have seen validated over the past year and a half is the conviction that you can, through action through civil society, through protests that are breaking out in historic numbers, the fact that there have been routinely millions of people across the United States and internationally rejecting an authoritarian system of doing things. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to say that there won't be long-term or even generational damage to U.S. stature, to the lives that have been lost permanently. All of that is true. But one thing we have seen reinforced in the last year and a half, and one of my convictions in starting All Rise News, is that our institutions aren't abstractions. We contribute to them. That civic engagement matters, and civic engagement accomplishes things. When in our system of government, unlike many systems of government around the world, the fact that the leader of the country wants you in jail doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to go to jail. A jury has a decision in that. A judge has a decision in that. And you can have zealous advocacy even if the authoritarian-minded ruler wants to crush the most powerful lawsuits and make them docile to his commands. That the most grievous injuries to the rule of law that we have sustained, in my opinion, are those who have affirmatively chosen not to fight. And those institutions have been covered in shame.
Adam, so if we can, let's put up All Rise News. Adam, how can people, if they want to follow you, get in touch, learn more about what you're writing, how can they get in touch with you?
Thank you so much for that question. They can visit www.allrisenews.com. And if they subscribe there, either become a free or paid subscriber, you'll receive my newsletters. If you become a paid subscriber, you do the work, you help sustain the work that I do going all across the country. I was in court in Alexandria for James Comey. I'll be in North Carolina when that case goes there, and Tennessee. That's all with the help of subscribers. And that's where you can find my work. That's my home in journalism.
Adam, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on today to talk about these issues. We'd love to have you come back and talk more about all these important issues affecting our democracy. And, we look forward to having you back on. It's really been a pleasure to have you, Adam.
Been a pleasure for me too. I look forward to the next time as well.